this is Ebenezer right here in his little like night gown situation. So it says, Scrooge awoke in the middle of a great snore and bolted up in bed. It was just before the stroke of 1. He pushed his bed curtains aside and established a sharp lookout. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by. All this time he lay upon his bed in a blaze of ruddy light coming from the room beyond. At last he got up to investigate and shuffled to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were hung with the crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy. There were turkeys, geese, and long wreaths of sausage, mince pies, plum puddings, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, and seething bowls of punch. In easy state upon the throne, there sat a jolly giant. Here's a little setup. Come in, exclaimed the ghost, holding his glowing torch aloft. Come in and know me better, man. Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. Scrooge reverently did so. You have never seen the like of me before, exclaimed the spirit. Never, Scrooge answered. The spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth beyond compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. This time you will teach me and let me profit by it. The ghost of Christmas present arose. Oh God, touch my robe. This book is so clunky for some reason. I don't know if it's like just me or I don't know. This is the his clerk. Can't think of his name. Scrooge did as he was told. Holly, mistletoe, berries, ivies, turkeys, geese, pies, puddings, fruits, and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the hour of night. They stood in the cities on Christmas morning, where people were scraping the snow from the pavement. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, yet people were shoveling away, were jovial and full of glee. Soon the steeples called good people all to the church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes. And the same time there emerged from scores of lanes and nameless turnings innumerable people carrying their dinners to the baker's shops. Scrooge and the second spirit went on invisible straight to Scrooge's clerks. On the threshold of the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling. Think of that. Bob had a very little money, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-roomed house. Up rose Mrs. Cratchit, dressed in a shabby gown, but brave in ribbon. She laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes. What has ever got your precious father, then? Mrs. Cratchit said. Now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came in, glanced out the window. Father's coming, they cried. In came Bob with Tiny Tim. Upon his shoulder he had been Tim's thoroughbred all the way from the church. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore look at Tiny Tim, he's so cute. He bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Here you are at last, said Miss Cratchit. How did little Tim behave? Good as gold. That's Scrooge and the giant. If he's giant, then Scrooge must also be huge. Anyway, somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Bob's voice trembled when he told him this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. Mrs. Cratchit made gravy hissing hot while Master Pete mashed the potatoes, and the 2 young Cratchits set chairs for everybody. At last the dishes were set on, grace was said, and dinner was served. There was never such a goose. Its tenderness and flavor, size, and cheapness were the themes of the universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was sufficient meal for the whole family. Afterwards, Mrs. Cratchit left the room for a half-minute. She returned flushed, but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball blazing in brandy, and sporting Christmas holly stuck into the top. "Oh, what a wonderful pudding," Bob Cratchit said. Look at their little family. They're so cute. He regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Everybody had something to say, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last, dinner was all done. Cloth was cleared, the hearth was swept, and a fire made up. Apples and oranges were put upon the table, and shuffled of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth. "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears," said Bob. "God bless us," with all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, everyone," Tiny Tim said, the last of all. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before. "Tell me, will Tiny Tim live?" This part always makes me so sad, dude. "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain, the child will die." Oh, God. "No, no," said Scrooge. "Oh, no, kind spirit, please say he will be spared. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future," returned the ghost, "none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he better do it and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit. Trembling, he cast his eyes upon the ground, but he raised them speedily, hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed," cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon." "My dear," said Bob, "the children, Christmas Day." "I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year." The children drank the toast after her. It was their first of their proceedings, which had no heartiness. Scrooge was the ogre of the family, and the mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before. They were happy, grateful, and contented, and when they faded and looked happier yet, Scrooge had his eyes upon them, especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. By this time it was getting dark, and snow was falling heavily. As Scrooge and the spirit went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires in the kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms were wonderful. It was a great surprise, though, to Scrooge, who had suddenly heard a hearty and familiar laugh. He recognized it at his own nephew's, and at the same time found himself in a bright gleaming room. "Ha ha!" laughed Scrooge's nephew. "Ha ha!" When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed heartily too, and their assembled friends roared out lustily. "He said that Christmas was a bah humbug," cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it too." "More shame for him, Fred," said Scrooge's niece indignantly. "He's a comical old fellow," said Scrooge's nephew, "and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him." "I'm sure he is very rich, Fred," hinted Scrooge's niece. "At least you always tell me so." "What of that, my dear?" said his nephew. "His wealth is of no use to him. He doesn't do any good with it. He doesn't make himself comfortable with it. I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Therefore I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not." After tea, Scrooge's niece played upon the harp, played among other tunes a simple little air. When this strain of music sounded, all the things that the ghost of Christmas past had shown Scrooge came upon his mind, and he softened more and more. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. First there was a game at the blind man's buff. Then everyone joined the game of how, when, and where. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they played, and so did Scrooge, forgetting that his voice made no sound in their ears. He sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed quite right, too. There followed a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what, he only answering to the questions yes or no, as the case was. Under brisk questioning, he revealed that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, a rather disagreeable animal. A savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes and talked sometimes, lived in London and walked about the streets. He was not a horse or a cow or a bull or a dog or a pig or a cat or a bear. At every question, his nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter. At last, his wife's sister, falling into the same state, cried out, "I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is." "What is it?" cried Fred. "It's your Uncle Scrooge." Which it certainly was. He had given us plenty of merriment, I am sure, said Fred, and it would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. And so I say, Uncle Scrooge, Uncle Scrooge, they cried. Uncle Scrooge becomes so light of heart he would, and that's him right there, he would have pledged the company in return, but the whole scene paused off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside the sick beds, and they were cheerful. In the almshouse, the hospital, and jail, in ministry, and misery's every refuge, he left his blessing. It was a long night, but it was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Our spirits' lives so short, asked Scrooge. My life upon this globe is very brief, replied the ghost. It ends tonight. The time is drawing near. Forgive me, said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe, but I see something strange protruding from your skirts. Look here, was the spirit's sorrowful reply. From the folds of its robe brought out two children, wretched, abject, miserable. They were a boy and a girl. Where graceful youth should have been filled their features out. A stale, shriveled hand had pinched and twisted them. Scrooge startled back and appalled. Spirit, are they yours? They're a man's, said Spirit, looking down at them. This boy is ignorance, and this girl is want. Have they no refuge or resource? Cried Scrooge. Are there no prisons? Said the Spirit, turning on him the last time with his own words. Are there no workhouses? The bell struck. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. At last the stroke ceased. He beheld a solemn phantom, draped in a hood, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. Look at these poor kids, dude. This one scares the hell out of me in the movie. I don't know if y'all have seen the movie of this. Like, they did like an actual movie. He is terrifying in this movie. Anyways, this is day 4, the last of the spirits. The phantom slowly and silently approached. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left visible only its hands. I am the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge. The spirit answered not. You are about to show me the shadows of things that will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant, as if the spirit had inclined its head. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge trembled. Ghost of the future, he exclaimed, I fear you more than any of the other specters. But I know your purpose is to do me good. Will you not speak? It gave him no reply. Lead on, said Scrooge. The night is waning fast. It is precious time, I know. The phantom moved away as it had come, and Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress. They scarcely seemed to enter the city. The city rather seemed to spring on about them. But there they were, amongst the merchants who hurried up and down, clinking the money in their pockets. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of a businessman, observing that his hand was pointed to them. Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. No, said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. I don't know how much about it either. I only know he's dead. When did he die? Inquired another. Last night, I believe. What has he done with his money? Asked the red-faced gentleman. I haven't heard, said the first man, yawning. He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know. The spirit and Scrooge left the busy scene and went in an obscure part of town. There were always foul and narrow. The shops and houses were wretched. Scrooge and the phantom entered one low-browed shop just as the chairwoman with a heavy bundle slunk in as well. But she had scarcely entered with a laundress, similarly laden, came in too, closely followed by a man fated in black. After a short period of blank astonishment, they all three burst into a laugh, for they had come from the same place. A man in black untied his bundle first, and it had a seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value. They were examined and appraised by old Joe, the owner of the shop, who chalked the sums. He was disposed "That's your account," said Joe, "and I wouldn't give it another 6 pence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next?" The laundress put out sheets and towels, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. "Now undo my bundle," said Joe, said the chairwoman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it and dragged out the large heavy roll of dark stuff. "What do you call this?" Joe said. "Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you looked down, all rings and all, with him lying there?" "Why not?" replied the woman. "If he wanted to keep them after he was dead, he'd had somebody to look after him instead of gasping out like they're alone by himself. You may look through that shirt still till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it had it not been for me." "What do you call wasting it?" asked old Joe. "Putting it on him to be buried. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again." Scrooge listened to the dialogue in horror. "Spirit," he shuddered, "from head to foot, I see the case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends to be that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?" He recoiled in terror, for the scene had not changed. Now he stood bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a raggedy sheet, there lay something covered up. The room was very dark. A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon the bed, and on it, unwatched, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced toward the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the bed. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slight raising of it would have disclosed the face. "I understand you, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit." Again it seemed to look upon him. The ghost conducted him several streets familiar to his feet. There entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, and found his family seated around the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing. "It must be near your father's time," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Past it, rather," Peter answered, shutting his book. "But I think he had to walk a little slower than he used to, Mother." They were quiet again. At last Cratchit said, and in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once, I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed." "So have I," cried Peter. "Often." "So have I," exclaimed another. "So had all. But he was very light to carry," she resumed, "and your father loved him so that it was no trouble. And there's your father at the door." She hurried to meet them. "You went today then, Robert?" said Mrs. Cratchit. "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. I promised him that we would walk there on a Sunday. My little child, my little child. Oh, God." He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. Then they all drew about the fire and talked, the girls and the mothers still working. "Spectre," said Scrooge, "something informs me that our parting moment is ahead. And I know it, but I not know how. Tell me what the man who was lying dead, the ghost of Christmas yet to come, conveyed him to an iron gate." He paused and looked around before entering a churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay under the ground. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge advanced toward it, trembling. "Answer me one question," he said. "Are these the shadows of things that will be? Are they shadows of things that may be only?" Still the ghost pointed down towards the grave. "Men's courses foreshadow certain ends," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Is this not true?" The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept toward it, trembling as he went, following the finger, reading upon the stone his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "Am I the man who lay upon the bed?" he cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and then back again. "No, spirit, oh no," he said, clutching his robes. "Hear me. I am not the man I was. Why show me this, if I am past all hope?" For the first time a hand appeared to shake. "Good spirit," he pursued, "assure me that I yet have changed these shadows by an altered life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honor the Christmas in my heart, and try to keep it all year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me." Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, Scrooge saw an alteration in the phantom hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. was Ebenezer Scrooge. But there's no, oh god, sorry. There's a date here, but there's no end date. So, like, it doesn't say when he's gonna die. Stave 5. The end of it. Yes, the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room he was in, his own. The best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, and to make amends in, I will live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge repeated. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. He was flustered and glowing with good intentions. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath. I am as light as a feather. I am as happy as an angel. I am as merry as a schoolboy. A Merry Christmas, everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there, perfectly winded. There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered, cried Scrooge. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. Ha ha ha. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it did a splendid laugh. The most illustrious laugh. The father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. I don't know what day it is, said Scrooge. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. Never mind. I don't care. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, golden sunlight. Oh, glorious, glorious. What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes. Eh? What's today, my fine fellow? Said Scrooge. Today, replied the boy. Why, Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day, Scrooge said to himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything of like. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello, rejoined the boy. Do you know the butcher's in the next street but one? Scrooge inquired. I sure hope I did, replied the lad. An intelligent boy, Scrooge said. Remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? What, the one as big as me? What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to have talked to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now. Is it? Said Scrooge. Go and buy it. Who, me? Exclaimed the boy. I'm in earnest, Scrooge said. Go and buy it. This is him talking. There's a little boy right there. And there's Scrooge. And tell them to bring it here. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes. I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's, whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow. As he stood waiting for the butcher's man, the knocker caught his eye. I shall love it as long as I live, cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. What an honest expression it has in its face. What a wonderful knocker. Here's the turkey. Hello, how are you? Merry Christmas. It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped them off in a minute. Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town, Scrooge said to the butcher man. You must have a cab. The chuckle with which he said this, the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensated the boy were only exceeded by his chuckle with which he sat down, breathless in his chair again. He dressed himself in all his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people by this time were pouring forth, as he had seen them, with the ghost of Christmas present. He had not gone far when he beheld the poorly gentleman who had visited him the day before. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Yes, dear sir, said Scrooge, taking the old gentleman by both hands. How do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. A Merry Christmas to you, sir. Mr. Scrooge. Yes, that is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness? Here, Scrooge whispered in his ear. Lord bless me. My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious? If you please, not a farthing less. Many great back payments are included in it, I assure you. My dear sir, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, please, retorted Scrooge. I am much obligated to you. I thank you 50 times, bless you. He went into the church and walked about the streets and watched people hurrying to and fro and patted children on the head. He never dreamed that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up to knock. Is your master at home, my dear? He said to the girl. Yes, sir. Where is he, my love? Said Scrooge. He's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress. I'll show you upstairs if you please. Thank you, he knows me. "Fred," said Scrooge. "Why, bless my soul, who is that?" "It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come for dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" "Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece just looked the same. So did everybody when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he had been there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That had been the whole thing to set his heart upon. And he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1/4 past. No Bob. He was a full 18.5 minutes behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come in. His hat was off before he opened the door. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen. "Hello," growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could to feign it. "What do you mean, coming in here at this time of day?" "I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time." "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "Yes, I believe you are. I think. Step this way, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir," Bob pleaded. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. "Now, I tell you what, my friend, I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer, and therefore," he continued, leaping from his stool, giving Bob a dig in his waistcoat, "therefore I am about to raise your salary." Bob trembled and got near to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it and calling him to people outside for help. "Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, than I have ever given you. A raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. We will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a bowl of Christmas punch. But for now, make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and meant infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die. He was a second father. He became a good friend, as good as a master, as good a man as any good old city knew. He had no further dealings with the spirit, but it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. May that be true said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. And that's it. I love that story. I think it's so cool. I am glad I definitely split this video in half because it would have been an hour and that would have been really, really long for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I love reading these kind of books, so what better time than this time of year? I hope you guys are having an amazing December, an amazing Vlogmas, or whatever holiday or lack thereof you are celebrating. If you don't celebrate any holidays at all, I hope you have an amazing December. If you celebrate holidays, I hope you're having an amazing holiday, and I hope you are enjoying Vlogmas content. I love you guys very much.